Okay, welcome back. This is going to be a review of Chapter 9. This will be the last chapter in the Unit 2 section. So, the chapter basically opens up with the question of why do younger people tend to vote less than their older cohorts? And they present three theories, right? Three theoretical foundations for why this might be. The first is the rational choice theory, and it mostly focuses on costs, right? The C term in the rational choice model. And its basic argument is that the young tend to lack resources, which increases their costs of participation. Um, and as you gain resources through life, such as life achievements, a social circle, political knowledge, etc., that this reduces your costs of voting over time, and so you become more and more likely to vote as you get older. Okay, so then theory number two says it's all about residential mobility, right? And that young kids around 18 to 22 tend to be on the move much more. They tend to live in apartments or dorms or things of that sort. And so they're much less likely to vote than, say, a homeowner or someone who's been in their home for many years. Um, and the main reason, again, for this is the costs, right? The costs of finding out how to register at your new addresses, and then finding out where your polling place is, and then actually getting to the poll because you might not have a car, etc. Um, and so later in life, as your residential mobility stabilizes, you become more likely to vote. Okay. Theory three says that voting is accumulated as a as a habit, basically. There's a little bit of a problem with this, right? Because that thesis doesn't say anything about how voting starts, right? Or sort of why you become more likely to vote later in your life or after a particular vote. It just says that voting is a habit. Um, so I guess later in the chat, there's a few really cool research articles in there about sort of why voting accumulates as a habit. I'm kind of going to skip over that. I'll let you read that stuff. Um, we'll move on to where the political attitudes actually come from, right? And the vast majority of the literature has landed on the idea that political attitudes come during your formative years by your parents, your church group, your peers, um, and that the vast majority of your political leanings come from childhood socialization, right? Not later in life. It's all sort of developed early in your childhood socialization. So we move on a little bit. There was a really interesting point in there. They said that the 26th Amendment, which is the amendment in the United States in 1971 that was passed that lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. They thought, he was going to do great things for voter turnout, but it actually did the opposite, right? Because as we know, as research says, young people tend to vote much less than older people. And so lowering the voting age from 21 to 18, while it might have philosophically excellent outcomes, you give more of your society a chance to have a say in the representation, but it also led to many more non-habitual voters, right? People who just don't vote. And so this is actually part of the reason that we've seen a decline in voting since the 80s, is because we added this whole new sort of non-voting cohort into our voting rolls. So I thought that was a pretty interesting point. So the chapter closes on like, how do we fix this problem? What are the policy implementation, what are policies that we can implement that can help the situation and, increase the likelihood of making habitual voters in our society? And the first is the idea of compulsory voting. There are some European countries, and I believe Australia does compulsory voting, where you pay a small fine basically if you don't vote. There are exceptions, right? If you're disabled or something of that sort, then you can get out of voting. But for the most part, if you're able-bodied, or you're not at an institution of some sort, then you have to vote, or you pay like an $80 to $100 fine. So some policy implementation, some policy outcomes that would probably come from that are that you would reduce the inequality in voting amongst your citizens, right? So we know that the young, the poor, and the uneducated tend not to vote, and so the rich, sort of majority ethnic group, and the highly educated tend to be the ones who are tended to by politicians and their policies. And so compulsory voting would probably lead to a lot more sort of young and poor and uneducated voters voting, which would actually turn politicians to need their support, right? Because they're suddenly voters. And this would probably lead to sort of more leftist welfare policies, right? And we've seen this in a few countries where they enacted compulsory voting. We've seen more leftist policies. The other sort of policy idea that they have is to just lower the voting age from 18 to 16, like pass a new amendment, allow new voters on the rolls. This could be a problem, though, right? Because we know that young people don't vote, and you might just be watering down your voting rolls yet again. There is some research that says that kids who live in their home with their parents are more likely to vote than those who are in, say, like dorms or apartments, because their parents sort of maybe pressure them into voting. So there is this idea that like 16-year-olds actually might be more likely to vote than 18 to 20-year-olds, because they live in their home with their parents, who are probably more likely to be voters than they are. But this could really go either way, and it could bite the policymakers in the butt if they turn out not to be voters, right? So anyway, that's it from me. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next section.